We're so glad that you've joined us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Our hope is that you're both encouraged and challenged in your relationship with Jesus. Be blessed as you listen to this week's message.
So a couple of years ago, Brooke and I are coming up on 17 years of marriage this December. And I don't like to brag about a whole lot of stuff, but that's pretty sweet. So we're coming up on 17 years of marriage, and whenever we first got married, obviously, you think you know each other pretty well, but you kind of realize pretty soon on that you don't quite know each other as well as you thought you did. And there are things that you know about yourself that they don't know yet, and you're like, how do I break it to them, or how does this, I think let's go ahead with the marriage thing, but there's some stuff about me that maybe you don't know yet, because let's be honest, okay, all the single people out there, you're doing this right now, you are lying to the person that you're dating. You are showing them a false version of yourself. You're not being completely honest. You're not being completely truthful. Have you had the toothpaste conversation yet? Have you talked about whether you just crumple it or you roll it up? Of course not, because that's not pertinent yet. But there's things about yourself that you're not being completely honest about yet. And there were some things that I kind of kept from Brooke, and I put on a good face, and I made sure that she saw the best possible me. Well, one day, a few years into our marriage, it really came out. And see, whenever I was younger, I used to have an anger problem. I would just get, whether it was with sports or anything, I would be so angry if I wouldn't do well, and I would get so mad at myself all the time. And I just had temper problems, and I would, one time, I remember punching a hole in this door, just like stuff like, I broke a hand playing basketball whenever I was in high school, because I was so mad, I punched this padded wall, and I broke my hand, just made a fool out of myself with my anger. And I was working on this truck one day, this truck that I had, and I was changing out the fan belt. And if you've ever changed out a fan belt, there's a lot of tension there, and it's actually quite difficult for one person to do, or at least without the right tools. So I'm working on this truck, and I'm changing out the fan belt, and Brooke is in the front yard with me, and I'm working on this truck, and she's kind of there, and I'm having a hard time. I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting upset, and then all of a sudden, I don't think I had the right head size for that nut, or maybe I don't remember if it was a crescent wrench, but something happened and it slipped. And when it slipped, my hand jammed down into the pulleys, and I cut my knuckles right away. And it was like I was punching the engine of my truck. So I cut up my knuckles right away. And right when that happens, the me that I didn't tell Brooke about started to come out. And this anger came, and I grabbed this wrench, and it was so stupid, but I grabbed this wrench, and I take off running, and I spin, and I just throw it in the yard. And as I throw it, I let out an expletive, bleep, I curse right there in front of Brooke, and I turn around, and I'm like, yeah, and I turn around, I'm like, show that wrench, but I turn around, and I see Brooke standing there, and Brooke is standing there, and she is like, who are you? Well, she's got this face on, and she doesn't say a word, but her face says, I knew I was better than you. I just knew it. I knew you weren't a real Christian. I could see it in her eyes. She's judging me to my soul, and I'm having this conversation with her in my heart, I'm like, but you don't know how much it hurt, and the truth is, she was shocked. She was so shocked that I could curse, and I would be so angry like this, but I wasn't surprised, right? Like this is like what I naturally think of. Anytime that I stub a toe or anything, I'm like, I got a list of words going through my head, at this time. So I'm like, I wasn't shocked, but she was shocked because I had done a pretty good job at the surface Christianity thing. But in my heart, there was something amiss. There was something wrong. There was an attitude that was wrong. Something was off, and the way that I viewed everything was different. I was really good at the surface thing, but I believe that every time that Christianity is tested by fire, the stuff that doesn't matter is going to get burned up, and then you really see what you got. It's only in the middle of trials, it's only in the middle of pain that you really see what you're made out of, that you really see the kind of commitment that you have to the Lord. And this is not a works message. I don't want you to think that. We are saved by grace in Jesus, and I'm not talking about your salvation, but I'm talking about our fruit today. The fruit today. I believe that there is a paradox to the Christian life, that we can go through pain and suffering, but not look like everybody else when we do. That there can be a fruit that happens that doesn't make any sense in the middle of your craziness, in the middle of the mess that you're facing. You can see your life as blessed. You can see God in the middle of the mess that you're in. I didn't do a great job of that day. And, one of the crazy things is this week we're getting a lot of equipment in because we lost a lot with the flood and as a church. But a lot of the equipment's coming in. So I'm setting up these big road boxes. There's a box similar to that one in my living room. And as I'm tipping it over to put the wheels on it, I didn't realize my toe was that close. And I rolled the box over on my toe. And I'm like, it lands on my big toe. And I let out a scream. And I fall down on the ground. And Brooke runs in. And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like wincing on the ground, rolling around. And when the pain finally stops and my toes just throbbing a little, I stopped and I said, Brooke, you know what's crazy? I didn't even think about cursing. I didn't even think about it because something's changed in my spirit. Something's changed in my heart, and I'm like, I'm ready to be a pastor, guys. I'm finally there's something in my heart that has changed a little. And I'm not better than her now just because I don't, but there's something in our heart that can change. The attitude of your heart can change even when you're in the middle of mess. I love this verse. Isaiah 61 says this. In verse 3, the first part of 3, it says, to all who mourn in Israel. And Israel is God's people. And the Bible says in the New Testament that even the things in the Old Testament can be applied to us today. So imagine yourself, Israel, God's people. To all those who mourn, we do mourn. He will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, and festive praise instead of despair. So the truth is today, you will have ashes, and you will have mourning, and you will have despair, but God says, I want to give you a trade. I want to trade something for it. I want to trade my joy, and I want to show you the blessing in the middle of it. If you don't know Jesus, then you don't have that. You don't have that promise. You don't have that ability to be able to trade your mess for God's blessing. You don't have that. But we have that in God. And that's what I want this series and this message today to be about. I want to talk about the joy paradox today. How in the world can you possibly smile in the middle of the mess? You will mourn. You will hurt. You will have a difficult time. But it doesn't have to own you. It doesn't have to own you. There's a new life in Jesus. I want to look at a story today in Acts 16. I love this story, and it's kind of part of it is really a Sunday school story that you may have grown up with or heard. If you haven't heard it, it's just as cool if you've heard it many times or not. It's an incredible story of Paul and this guy named Silas. I want to set up the story and talk about just kind of where they are going into this epic and memorable story. In Acts 16, it says that they're just doing their thing. They're doing ministry. They're serving God as we should. And it says in verse 16, one day as we're going down to the place of prayer, so they're going to go and pray. They're going to go serve God. They're going to do an act of worship as they normally do. They met a slave girl who had a spirit that enabled her to tell the future. She earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. So she followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, these men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved. I want to stop right there, and I want you to notice two different things about this. It doesn't really have anything to do with the message, but I want you to see something. The Bible mentions right here that this girl's a slave girl. She's a slave to a man, and she's a slave to a demonic possession. She's a slave to this, and that's because she's a slave, her purpose is stolen so that she can give honor and credit to this demonic influence in this man. But she recognizes that these men are servants of God. See, there's a difference between being a slave of the world and a servant of God. When you're a servant of God, you are given purpose, and your life matters, and you are making an impact, and God deposits something in you. But when you're a slave to the world, something is taken from you. There is a difference between you being a slave to the world and being a servant of God. That's free. Verse 18. This went on day after day. This girl is tormenting them. So Paul got so exasperated that he turned and said to the demon within her, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. So he just lets this demon have it, and instantly it left her. Her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered, so they grabbed Paul and Silas, dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. The whole city is in an uproar because of these Jews. Now, they're lying. This isn't happening. This guy's fabricating this, and you'll see in a minute that people get behind this, but this guy's making this up. The whole city's in an uproar because of the Jews. They shouted to the city officials, they're teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. So a mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas. You ever feel like life just piles on the things? Like it's just stuff after stuff that just keeps happening to you? this mob is quickly forming. And so they're in a place where it's just like, what is going on? All we did is we just tried to serve God, and all of a sudden, like this, we're getting in trouble here really quick. So this mob quickly forms against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rods. So they were severely beaten. Then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure that they didn't escape, so the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet to the stocks. You ever feel like you're in the inner dungeon? You ever feel like life is just so much pressure? As Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, it means the wine press, where Jesus was feeling the pressure of our sin, the pressure of life, that we feel the same thing. There's this pressure. Do you ever feel like you're in the inner dungeon and it can't possibly get any worse? In this moment, Paul and Silas this whole town is turning against them. It's legitimately bad for them. It is actually bad, okay? Just like a lot of you are experiencing today. It is actually a tough thing that you're dealing with. You are seriously, this is not teenage drama. You're dealing with something real, something that is drastically hurtful in your life. It is changing your viewpoint on everything, and even to the point where you see God differently. There's a weight on you. You feel like you're in the inner dungeon. And Paul and Silas, they're just doing the right thing. He didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble came looking for them. They're doing the right thing, and their faith is challenged in this moment, so they just stand up and they do the right thing, and they honor the name of God, but instead they get in trouble for it. But I think that it's important for us to realize that what Paul saw and what we need to see is that Paul was more fearful of ignoring the call of God than he was of some demon. And he was more fearful of ignoring the call of God than he was of man, or even being thrown into prison, even the inner dungeons. He cared more about the opinion of God and the call that God had put on his life. No matter what happens to us in life, no matter how heavy, no matter how destructive it is for you, there is someone that is still keeping tabs of where you are, and he's got you. He's taking care of you. You are okay in his hands. Let's be more concerned about what God's opinion is about where you are. Let's learn to lean on him and trust in him more. He's got you. He's got you. You're not alone in the middle of this. I love what ends up happening. In verse 25, it says they are in the middle of the night, around midnight. Paul and Silas are in the inner dungeon, shackles on their feet, and they're praying and singing hymns to God. What are they doing? They have no business praying and singing hymns to God, but they are praying and singing hymns, and all the other prisoners are listening. I'll be honest with you, I'm a slightly emo Christian. Anybody else like that? Anybody else you have a difficult time sometimes praying or worshiping? Stuff gets you and you're just like, I can't deal right now. I can't do it. I can't be a Christian right now. I don't feel like being a Christian right now. I'll be honest with you, I'm like that sometimes. Whenever stuff is going on bad in my life and it is so heavy that I can't deal with it, I really like to take the reins from God and try to do things on my own. This is way wrong, but I like to try things first before I let him have it. And if I can't fix it, then I might release it to him. Whenever it gets really bad, then I'll let it go. But man, I need to work. Or I got the cursing thing done, but this thing is still, So, but there's just times in my life I just don't feel like worship. I don't feel like praying. But that's what makes this so powerful, is they are in the inner dungeon. They've got no business praying or worshiping God. But that is their first response. The first thing you see them do when they get in prison is they begin to pray and they begin to worship. A few weeks ago, I don't even remember what the context was, but I was going through a little depression kind of week, and it was just thing after thing just kept going the wrong way. And I remember laying on the couch, and I'm like moping, reading or whatever, and Brooke's like, "You need to get over this. What's going on?" And she's like, "You need to pray." And I'm like, "I don't want to pray, woman. I'm not praying right now." So she begins to pray. She prays right there in the living room, and I'm like, I don't want to hear no prayers right now, I'm like frustrated. I'm just like, I can't muster up the strength to do it. But I got to tell you, as soon as she began to pray, I can't explain it, and I'm not like this super hokey, supernatural, everything's supernatural, but something happened in that moment. The moment she began to pray, the Spirit of God came in the room, and all of a sudden my attitude began to, it was, the best way I could describe it, it was like my heart had fallen in mud, and someone was pouring a bottle of water over it. And it felt like my heart was just being washed, and it was like this weight, and I couldn't do it for myself, but she was able to do it for me. And she was able to bring the Spirit of God in the room. And, I mean, of course, he was there. I just wasn't listening. But, and finally, and then I stood up. I got on my feet, and I'm like, come here, family. And I grabbed Brooke, and I grabbed the kids, and I'm like, we're going to pray. And I'm like, so all of a sudden, I take the lead, right? Like, I take the credit for it. Like, I'm feeling super spiritual now. And Brooke's like, this is the wrench thing all over again. I'm still better than you. But so we get up, and we just begin to pray together. And as we pray, like it's just constant like cleaning, and my attitude and everything just began to change. There's going to be moments when you just don't feel like worship, you don't feel like praying, but I promise you, it is the answer. You've got to go to Jesus. You've got to go to him. And that's what they do in this situation is say, there's a season for lamenting. There is a season for mourning, but lamenting is not the same thing as complaining. There is never a season for complaining. I believe actually that every opportunity for lamenting or for complaining is also an opportunity for praise. You can also not just, if I'm going to have like 3 different real quick points today. Every opportunity for complaining is also an opportunity for praise. So when you're faced with something impossible and you want to complain about it, think about praise instead, because that's where the power lies. That's where the anointing lies. I believe our worship is never more pure than whenever it comes from the inner dungeon. And when you're worshiping and you don't feel like it, when you're worshiping and you've got the weight of the world on you, your worship is the purest it will ever be. I want you guys to see Michael and Brittany's story. It's about 7.5 minutes long, but it's incredibly powerful. Their house flooded. 40 inches of water in it, but I want you to hear their story and just see where they are and how God has been able to transform their thinking in the middle of this. Check it out.
So it was August 13th, which I will remember forever because it was my birthday. We were making breakfast in our kitchen over here, and we noticed that the water in the little retention drain was completely full, and so we would keep going over and we would check on it. And at, I think like 10:30, it was completely full. And by 1:30, it was halfway up our backyard. So that's when we were kind of like, okay, maybe we should lift furniture or, at least evacuate. So we were planning on going on vacation, but we decided, okay, we'll just leave extra early. We weren't supposed to leave until Sunday, but we'll leave, Saturday today and get out. So we lifted everything about 6 or 12 inches, just thinking, maximum, that's how much water would come in.
It was the next day on Sunday after we had driven out with my parents and our baby to Gulf Shores that we got a picture from one of our neighbors of a guy walking down our street, not of our house, but of on our street, and he was in waist-deep water. And it was at that point that we started to get a little worried. The next day they sent us a picture of our house after the waters had started to go down, and the watermark was about 6 inches above our doorknob. So it turned out that we had gotten 46 inches of water outside the house, 41 inside.
So Monday morning we were in the kitchen and we were on vacation. We were just kind of talking about all the things that we had lost, like, the crock pot or the coffee pot, little things. My clothes, that was a big one for me. And I got really sad, and I was like, I can't talk about this anymore. And so I went outside and I just started, rather than talking to them about it, I went outside and just talked to God. And I was like, Lord, I lost so much. Like what is this, And I was like, I know you're gonna provide, but I need to hear that from you. Like, I need this moment from you. And I opened up my Bible and I just started reading, and I just was so overwhelmed. Like, I just felt him so close. And I remembered the verse about how the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and it's so true. Like, I just felt him so much in that moment. And I felt silly because I was on the balcony and I raised both hands and I just started like worshiping and I was singing a song and people could clearly see me and I felt really dumb. But it was such a good moment. Like, I'll never forget that moment, that it just went from sadness and brokenness to God turning that into a moment of love and peace and joy. Like I just felt him, and it was so good. And it was just a turning point for me.
We got a picture Tuesday afternoon from the same neighbor who was just really helpful through the whole situation. They stayed in the area, and so they were going around, and they went out on kayaks. You know, it's bad whenever your neighbor says, I went kayaking this afternoon and took a picture of your house.
Yeah.
And they sent us a picture of the water, and they kept updating us, and they finally sent us Tuesday afternoon, they sent us a picture of the water down below the doorstop. So we knew that we could get back in.
You know, things were just kind of like everywhere. Like the refrigerator was on the floor laying down, dressers were completely moved, and things were broken and warped, and it was worse than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
When we got here, people were already here helping us clean up and helping us just do everything that we needed to do, which is so great because honestly, when we first stepped in our house, I was just a little frozen. Like I kept just stopping and kind of staring and getting overwhelmed, and thankfully other people were just, you know, telling us what we needed to do and just kind of organizing the cleanup because my mental state was a little gone at that point.
We want to use this as a platform to reach the people that are in our neighborhood or in our community and say that, you know, like it is possible to move beyond this, that it's possible to have joy in this. It's possible to have fun while you're demoing your house and, you know, throwing away everything you own, because it's not about those things. You know, it's about, in a real sense, it's about the community that God has built around us. Like we loved having all of our anchor friends here with us, helping rip things out. And
the day after we found out our home had flooded, I was reading in Romans 5, and it talked about how you should have joy in your trials because the trials produce patience, and patience produces character, and character produces hope. And it's so true because when you're in a state of trials, you just get this hope of God to move and God to work. And it's a good state to be in.
Yeah.
You know, it's good to be lacking because you need God to provide and you're expecting Him to do things. And God has done so much in our lives. It's overwhelming. Yeah. He's done so much. And I feel like we are closer to Him as a couple and individually.
Charles Spurgeon said that I've learned to kiss the wave that casts me against the rock of ages. And that's like been so true in this situation that, you know, when life's storms take everything from you, the only thing that's left is God. And we're so glad that we have Him, because if we didn't, we would have nothing, you know, and we would be washed away too. But instead, we've gotten to work together and do projects, which she loves, but I don't. And so we've gotten to have fun together, even scraping popcorn ceiling. You know, we decided to take the opportunity to make this a home that we love even more than the one we already had, and to do things that we probably wouldn't have done except for that this forced our hand.
I mean, we moved in here and then I had a baby 2 weeks after we moved in here, so we didn't get to do any fixing or painting or anything, so it's about time. So I'm getting some new floors, some new paint, new furniture. I mean, we had all like hand-me-down furniture, so I'm super pumped about this. You know, new appliances. I've already got a new wardrobe thanks to someone that blessed me, and joy and peace go hand in hand. And to have joy, especially in a trial, you have to have peace, and you have to just, you know, you have to let things go. And God has just given me and Michael this amazing strength of peace and just letting things go. And He's just given us this attitude of joy and fulfillment and contentment with what we do and what we don't have. And it's more than when we had a home filled with things. And it really is a life lesson that I think that from this point on, we'll look back at this and say, wow, like I'm really glad that happened. You know, that's what we needed. We needed that in our hearts and in our lives, and it's totally changed our perspective. I wouldn't change it.
Man, what an incredible story, huh? It's amazing to see just their position of where their heart is. I mean, somebody please tell them their house flooded. It's like they don't even know. And it's amazing to see that resilience. And the truth is that doesn't come from inner strength. It doesn't come because we're so strong and we're able to handle it. You hear them talk about how much they lean on Jesus in the middle of this. And I believe that no matter where we are, no matter what you're facing, and whether it's something that where many people are dealing with in our city right now, or everything that you face in the future, you're going to feel like something is impossible for you at some point. But it's not impossible for God. And there's a rock. I love how Michael brings a quote up from Charles Spurgeon and says that he's learned to kiss the wave that casts him against the rock of ages. Jesus doesn't move. He's solid. He's always there. And everything in life that is throwing us around and seems to be stealing from so much, it's really just bringing us to Jesus. It's the best place for us to be. That's where we need to be at today. I want to look at what happens in the rest of the story. In verse 26, it says that Paul and Silas are praying and singing in this moment, and suddenly there's a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All of the doors immediately fly open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open, and he assumed the prisoners had escaped. So he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted, "Stop, don't kill yourself, for we're all here." You know what's amazing about this? My second point today, if you're going to take any notes, is worship equals freedom. And worship doesn't just equal freedom for you, but it's amazing to see how worship equals freedom for people around you. That all these prisoners are set free as well because Paul and Silas decided to worship. See, they couldn't choose the circumstance, but they could choose the response. And they chose to respond in such a way that would not only honor Jesus, but would call Jesus down to that prison, loose the chains off of them, loose the chains off of everyone else, and even stop a suicide. This guy is at the end, and he is looking at the value of his life, and he's like, what I was made for is done. I'm going to just go ahead and kill myself, this guard. And they could have seen him as the enemy, but instead they said, don't kill yourself. Because we serve a Jesus that has a purpose for you as well. It's amazing to see what happens in this story. Not only is this happening for them, and not only are they seeing that, hey, we're free, but this guy gets set free. I believe that the miracle that you're waiting for is waiting on your worship. Your miracle is waiting on your worship. And look what ends up happening. The miracle goes even further. Verse 29, this jailer ends up calling for the lights, and he runs to the dungeon, and he falls down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and he says, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" This man sees their response. He sees the power of worship, and he decides, I need to give my life to this Jesus. So he gives his life to Jesus. They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved along with everyone in your household." So they shared the word of the Lord with him and all who believed in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them. He washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them to the house and set a meal before him. And he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. Can you believe this? What an amazing story. These guys are all of a sudden caught off guard, thrown into prison in the inner dungeon, and because they choose to worship in this moment, you see a miracle for them, everyone around them, and family members that weren't even there. People come to Jesus whenever your response is worship. In the middle of your mess, people are going to be amazed and shocked at how you can respond in such a way. People are going to look at your life. Everything that you are as a believer, you are an example of what it means to follow Jesus. And you can potentially bring people to Jesus just because of your response, just because you choose to worship in that moment. There is power, if you're writing this down, the last point is there is power in the choice to see the blessing in the mess. That's a choice. To see blessing in the middle of the mess, it is a choice. There is power in that mess. You know, the blessing viewpoint's really incredibly attractive. That's why this guy is like taking care of their needs all of a sudden. He's like, man, you guys are incredible. Something about them was attractive. Single people, you want to be attractive? Change your attitude. Let your attitude be of one that you see God's blessing and hand at work in things. I'm going to ask the band to come up, and we're going to wrap up today. And, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, actually, we were on a small family trip to Oklahoma, and my sister lives there. My brother-in-law lives there. My brother-in-law is a pilot, and he's also he teaches young pilots, and they're in the process of going out into the mission field. And he said, "Hey, would you guys like to go flying one day while you guys are here?" And we thought, man, that would be incredible. I'd love to go flying. So we get in the plane, and it's small. You can only have 4 people at a time. So we go, Brooke and I, my brother-in-law Stephen, and first Brooklyn, and then we take Judah up. And he even lets me like fly the plane. I'm like, what are you doing, bro? Like, I get to like take off the ground and everything and like fly and turn this thing around and flying around downtown Tulsa and everything. It was cool. It was so cool. But when Judah's turn came to get in the plane, he was like super pumped. Every time that he's like in a vehicle and he sees a plane, he's like, Dad, plane, plane. He's like freaking out about the plane. He sees a helicopter. Dad, there's a plane, there's a plane. He loves the plane. So we finally get a chance to go, and he is so pumped about getting to go in this plane. Well, we finally like are ready to take off, and we put his little head muffs on, and we put him in the back seat with Brooke, and I'm in the front seat with my brother-in-law, Stephen, and Judah begins to scream and cry hysterically in the plane. And I'm like, bro, what's going on? What is wrong? We're trying to get him to calm down enough to where we can at least see what's going on. I'm like, if he's scared, like, I don't know if I want to get him out or like leave him in and just like make him do it so I could say, you flew in a plane and you liked it. You know, I was like, I don't want to rob this experience from him, but let's keep him in here. And finally calm down enough to let us know what was bothering him so much. He wasn't scared. He's crying, and he calms down just enough to say, I want to fly the plane. My 2.5-year-old son wants to fly the plane. I'm like, I am scared flying this plane right now. I do not belong here. What are you doing? You want to fly the plane? And the crazy thing about this is like we are circling in the air. We are thousands of feet in the air. We're hovering around 3,000 feet in the air, and we're flying all around, and like it's amazing. And he's looking out the window, and he's like, whatever. That's his face the whole time. He's like, I'm not flying this thing. I'm like, dude, you're flying in a plane. You know how when you're in a vehicle and you see them passing by, you always think it's so cool? You get to fly in one. But it wasn't enough. He wanted to control it. And I thought about that, and I thought, how many times do we miss the blessing of flying because we want control? Because we want to own it. We want to take the steering wheel for ourselves. And whenever you don't have control and you don't have the grasp on your life and you can't tell your life where to go, you can't possibly see the blessing because it's not like you wanted it to be. Just because you're not flying doesn't mean you're not blessed. Just because you're not flying doesn't mean you're not in the plane. Where are you today? Are you in a place like I've been where I want to be in control? I just want to challenge you today. You've got to begin to see the blessing in the mess. And the first thing you need to do is you've got to let go. Let God. Trust Him, like Michael and Brittany's done.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel. If you would like to support the ministry of Anchor Chapel, you can easily do so by visiting our website, anchorchapel.com. Also, follow us on social media at Anchor Chapel. We'll see you next week. God bless.